Hello, you woolly walruses. It's time for another Magic Tree House read aloud. Remember, we're working on Magic Tree House number 24, Earthquake in the Early Morning. So when we last left off, we were on chapter 7, Dynamite, and chapter 8, Good Luck, San Francisco. So in chapter 7, Dynamite, Jack and Annie, of course, are trying to make their way back to the treehouse because now they have their something to lend, the poem. When they come across a person who tells them, hey, you better hurry up and get out of the way because we're getting ready to set off dynamite. But why though? Well, apparently, the mayor of San Francisco thought that if he blew everything up, the cinders, the fire, would not go from building to building and things wouldn't burn down. Except that didn't work. And so Jack and Annie run into an alley to try to be as safe as possible. And they end up being covered with dirt and debris. And in chapter 8, they're walking around, and guess who they run into again? It's reporter Betty and photographer Fred. And Betty says, hey, take a picture. So Jack is photographed holding the poem. We don't have soap. We don't have a city, but we got hope. Something like that. Okay? And they managed to make their way back to the treehouse. And now we pick up on chapter 9. These are our last chapters of this book, The Wonderful Room. The songs of the early morning birds filled the woods. Jack opened his eyes and sighed. They were back in Frog Creek. He could breathe again. His eyes didn't sting anymore. He was wearing his own clothes, even his sneakers. I wonder what happened to everyone, Annie asked anxiously. Andrew, Peter, and their aunt, and Betty, and Fred, and all the other people. Jack pulled out their research book. He turned to the last chapter. He read aloud. After the earthquake fires were put out, people from all over the world sent help to San Francisco. The brave citizens of the city never gave up hope. Many even wore badges that said, let's rebuild at once. In less than 10 years, San Francisco was once again one of the loveliest cities in the United States. Oh, good, breathed Annie. Hey, do you have our sign? Jack reached again into his pack. He pulled out the sign from Peter and Andrew. He placed it on the floor next to the list from the Civil War, the letter from the Revolutionary War, and the slate from the Pioneer Schoolhouse. We have all 4 writings now. So what happens next? Suddenly there was a roar. A bright light flashed through the treehouse. Jack covered his face. When he peeked over the tops of his fingers, he saw Morgan Le Fay. Morgan! Jack and Annie cried joyfully. They both hugged her. Morgan hugged them back. We found the 4 special writings for your library, said Jack. Annie picked up the list and the letter. Jack picked up the slate and the sign. Here they are, he said. They started to give everything to Morgan, but she held up her hand. Do not give them to me, she said. Someone else needs them more. Suddenly, a blinding light flashed through the treehouse again. There came a great roar, then silence. When Jack and Annie opened their eyes, they were no longer in the magic treehouse. They were standing in a huge, shadowy room. The room smelled wonderful, like leather, books, and a wood-burning fire. Flames crackled in a huge stone hearth. Along the walls were rows and rows of tall bookcases filled with books. Welcome to my library, Morgan said softly. Wow, whispered Jack. Someone here is waiting to meet you, said Morgan. I told him that 2 special messengers would arrive soon. Where is he? Morgan pointed to a man dressed in dark blue in a corner of the library. He sat in a chair. His head was bowed. His hair was black, streaked with silver. He looks tired, Annie whispered. Yes. He and his knights have been defeated, Morgan said quietly. He has given up all hope for his kingdom. How can we help him? Morgan looked down at the special writings that Jack and Annie held. Would it help if we showed him these? Jack asked. Morgan smiled. Come on, let's show him. They crossed the room and knelt before the tired-looking man. Excuse me. The man looked up. He had sad gray eyes. We're Morgan's messengers. We've come to help, said Jack. The man shook his head. I don't understand, he said in a deep, tired voice. Your children. How can you help? Sometimes children can help a lot. Jack and I have helped the general, and we help wounded soldiers. We help people caught in an earthquake and a twister. Man straightened up a little. That is brave, he said. We want to share how we did it. And he held up the list from the Civil War. This tells you how to help wounded people. And he held up the letter from the Revolutionary War. And this tells you that even when things look their worst, you shouldn't give up. Jack held up the slate from the Pioneer Schoolhouse. This says, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Then Jack held up the piece of wood from the San Francisco earthquake. And this says that when you've lost everything, you can still have hope. The man studied the 4 special writings. Then he looked at Jack and Annie with piercing gray eyes. You were both very kind to find all these things and bring them to me. Are you magic? Oh no, Morgan is magic. We're just ordinary kids. The man smiled. He seemed less sad and weary now. And I am just an ordinary king, he said softly. I suppose if 2 ordinary kids can find courage and hope, then an ordinary king can find it too. The man slowly stood up. I will go now and speak to my knights. I will share the wisdom you have brought me. He wrapped his cape around him. He bowed to Jack and Annie. Thank you, he said. Then he strode bravely out of Morgan's library. Yes, thank you, said Morgan, walking over to Jack and Annie. You're welcome, they said. These are for your library, said Jack. He and Annie gave Morgan the 4 special writings. Morgan smiled. Their wisdom will help many readers who come here, she said. Great, said Annie. It's time for you to go home now, said Morgan. Jack looked around Morgan's library. He hated to leave. It was the most wonderful room he'd ever seen. Don't worry, you can come back, said Morgan, reading his mind. You must come back, for you both have helped save Camelot. Goodbye for now. Before Jack or Annie could speak, there was another blinding flash, and they were home again in the treehouse in Frog Creek in the early morning. Chapter 10. The Mystery of Morgan's Library. I can't believe we took a trip to Morgan's library. Jack smiled and nodded. It was incredible, wasn't it? Yeah. A strong breeze gusted through the treehouse window. It blew open their research book about San Francisco. Annie reached for the book. Jack, look at this. She pointed to a photograph in the research book. It showed a boy and girl covered with dirt. The boy held a sign. It was a poem about hope. Annie read the caption aloud. After the earthquake, wildfires raged through the city. 2 brave children tried to give hope to others. Annie laughed. Those brave children are us. That's the picture Fred took of us before we left San Francisco. Jack laughed and shook his head with amazement. Annie closed the book. I guess we are 2 brave kids who try to give hope. We just gave some to King Arthur, didn't we? King Arthur? Said Jack. Yeah, said Annie. She started down the rope ladder. That was the mystery of Morgan's library. We had to give 4 special writings to King Arthur so he could get his hope and courage back and save Camelot. That wasn't King Arthur, said Jack. He threw on his pack and followed Annie. Sure it was, she said, stepping onto the ground. Didn't you hear him say, I'm just an ordinary king? Get it? King? But King Arthur is not an ordinary king. Well, he thinks so. I knew it was him. I feel it. She smiled. Then she started through the Frog Creek woods. Jack stared after her. King Arthur? As birdsong filled the early morning woods, Jack thought about their visit to Morgan's library. He remembered the sad king and how their writing seemed to give him strength. Maybe Annie was right. Maybe they really had helped King Arthur save Camelot. And maybe someday they would go back. Hurry, Jack! Mom, before Mom and Dad wake up. Coming, Jack shouted. And he took off after her, running for home. Finally. So, sometimes Mary Pope Osborne, put some facts about books, about what her books are about in the back of the book. We know that. We've seen that already. So here's just a few facts that she's sharing with us about earthquakes. An earthquake is caused by a sudden shifting of the rocky plates that make up the Earth's surface. When the plates pull apart, push together, or slide past one another, the movement causes shock waves. The place where the plates of the Earth meet is called a fault. One of these faults, the San Andreas Fault, runs almost all the way through California. Every year, millions of earthquakes occur around the world where plates come together, but most are too small to be felt. The study of earthquakes is called seismology. A person who studies earthquakes is called a seismologist. Seismographs are instruments that detect the motion of earthquake waves. Since the big earthquake in 1906, Californians have become better prepared for earthquakes. New buildings are built to strict building codes that make them more earthquake-proof. Fire and police departments and emergency services are better able to handle earthquake problems. Citizens are better educated about how to protect themselves from earthquakes. So, in this book, there were a few true facts that they worked into the story, including one really cool one. Well, a few cool ones. One, a banker named Charles Crocker saved his bank's money by sending wagon loads of money down to the bay. A private library called the Sutro Library contained up to 200,000 books. The books were destroyed after they were moved from the Montgomery Building to Mechanics Pavilion, which burned down. The words on the sign that Peter and Andrew lent to Jack and Annie were written on a sign tacked to a crumbling building on Market Street. And one more really cool clue. The characters in this book, two characters that we come across, Peter and Andrew, are actually Mary Pope Osborne, the author of this book. They're actually her nephews. So that was a really cute and cool way for her to shout out some of her family. So I hope you enjoyed Earthquake in the Early Morning. We will start a new book, Magic Tree House number 25 next week. Magic Tree House number 25 is Stage Fright on a Summer Night. So I will see you then.